So the danger is clear that the international community is aware of the problem, and yet effective action is not being taken. So in my view, this can no longer be taken lightly. So we are actually allowing a post-World War system that humanity have created to take precedence over life-saving solutions. I mean, after the World War II and the pre-international system, it was largely replaced by a new world order with the creation of the United Nations, NATO, World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the General Agreement in Tariff and Trades. Now, this world order was created to allow economic stability, economic growth between nations, and therefore it prevented future world wars. However, to what extent can this order now usefully serve today's problems? Because we're living in very different times now. And many proposals have been made on reform of the current international institutions, but most have been blocked by political will and resistance to change, and also internal conflicts because of self-interest. So at this point in humanity's history, this is the most important thing of all. So it is imperative that we stand together. It is imperative that we face the challenges united. And it needs to be with wisdom and vision. They are imperative. And it is often very difficult to comprehend the magnitude of the climate crisis. And one could argue that it is totally beyond the current system's ability to solve it. So we need to face this reality, because the gap between the system within civilization and the climate crisis is huge. Not just a little bit, it's huge. So there is much talk within the UN about the urgency of action, and the recent UN report said that we need action at a global scale. But we are enclosed within a complex system that will always put economic factors above the very thing that sustains us. And if the current system continues to see the environment as just an externality, like another issue, rather than the very thing that sustains our existence, then we are surely heading for disaster. Because it is clear, not some New Age ideology, it's just a scientific fact that the Earth is the foundation from where all humans get their subsistence from. So this is now a new movement. And it's no longer what is spoken on the mainstream news about tax and issues relating to national self-interests, as if they are separate issues arising here and there. I would say that the center of gravity is now here, a humanitarian movement, collectively focusing on the real problems that humanity face. And that sounds outlandish, but there is now an urgency. This urgency can only be solved holistically. And I suppose, it appears that we are getting closer to a world that is about the earth stupid, rather than, to paraphrase Bill Clinton, the economy stupid. That is old politics now. It is outdated. So externalities no longer exist in the economy today. Human and earth systems are interconnected. And therefore, excessive self-centered individualism is the fundamental mistake, regardless of ideology, at a root level. And so an international humanitarian movement needs to emerge across the world, naturally. So now, totally, it is evident. In the 21st century, we are just increasingly, all the time, seeing this severe environmental crisis that are beginning, and have been for some time now, causing devastating impacts on communities around the world. And if you put it into context, if you actually look, what I'm saying now and what has been said may sound far-fetched, But let's just put it into perspective. In 9/11, when the world was focused on terrorism, who would have thought that only 7 years later, a president named Barack Hussein Obama would enter the White House? So society is now going through a global change because we are communicating non-locally now, not from a village, town, nation. Information is moving non-local. So it is now time to recognize this. And you can look at it on two sides. When there's a virus, it spreads now not from a local position outwards. It immediately goes all over the world through global travel. And on a global communication level, ideas spread non-locally. So humanity previously was locked in a mental cage. It was locked in a legal, economic, and political self-interest mental cage. But the truth is, nature is moving faster and faster than the cage. So there's a total disharmony between the human system and the natural system. And this is what needs to be observed directly, not as a concept. And if we do that, then an international humanitarian organization could be encouraged. And this will begin to see that interconnection and recognize that our dependence does rely on an ecosystem. And therefore, more collaborative types of eco-technology would develop. And if we look at it objectively, which science clearly has proven, it takes sunlight, cells, atoms, trees, working in complete cooperation to produce the apparent competitive environment. So cooperation is clearly wiser than competition. It's just a straightforward, obvious fact. And it's no longer about communism or capitalism. It is just simply an observable scientific fact. So when people, nations, and corporations put their own financial and self-interest first, regardless of consequences, then we put the whole community, the old Earth community, at risk. So economic balance and accountability is important and is one thing. But unrestrained financial pursuit at the expense of the Earth's environment and resources is clearly just myopic. So if we actually look at it directly, we are currently living in a system that is ignorant, not to mention catastrophic. So we have to know when to draw the line. And when we start destroying the very thing that sustains the lives of millions of species, which recent reports have shown is now happening at an extreme and alarming level, but ignored by national governments, and that includes, in truth, all of us, then we have crossed that line. So it is now time for a new unification, a humanitarian unification, a global cooperative order that is recognized by people who recognize that they are part of the Earth as a primary position, not as a nation or as a political group. But we recognize, we resonate that our common unity, it is a unity that's not in the future, but it is the unity that is now on this marvelous place called Earth. So it is now becoming, which is why it is becoming more and more obvious, the ignorance, that we have this obvious fact that leading philosophers, scientists, ecologists, lawyers, and many millions and millions of individuals and organizations across the world are beginning to sing the same hymn sheet and know full well that global problems can only be solved with global solutions. And even Gordon Brown has said this. And so it is within this context that the most pressing environmental obstacle is the inadequate level of international cooperation to solve it. So we need to urgently face these global humanitarian realities. And we need to finally take responsibility rather than just simply blaming world leaders and waiting for them to act with protests and petitions. Because the truth is, from my own experience working in government, is that they are also stuck within this outdated system. So their power is very limited. And Obama, prior to him becoming president, is a perfect example of this. You know, his power is very limited, even though we're told something otherwise. So there is no longer a father and mother in the sky. We are the people, and we are responsible. We all breathe the same air. We all receive the same sunlight and live on the earth. Therefore, we intrinsically have responsibility. The only real authority directly is the earth and the universe. All else is secondary. This is just simply an obvious fact. So we all are now aware of this change, which is happening on this planet at incredible speed. It's rapidly altering our understanding and behaviour. And which is why we're all here today, because as a result, ethics, transparency, sharing, sustainability, and creativity are increasingly driving mainstream agendas. So what did seem impossible only a few years ago no longer seems so now. So it is clear we are moving beyond the era of self-seeking individualism. It is no longer seen as the accepted norm. So it is now clear that we cannot use the current situation in order to project how we're going to be in the next 50 years, when we can see the reality as it is now. There's clearly an exponential change on the natural position, if you want to call it position, but the human legal system and political economic system is very slow. And this is not against the global economy. This is saying that the global economy can benefit the wealth of the earth and can benefit the interconnected web of life, including both humanity and biodiversity. But we've got to move beyond this idea of like socialism, state socialism, popular capitalism. We've got to move beyond that, and it's about the people, it's about individuals. And there are many great benefits if we can just clearly see that an international humanitarian organization with simultaneous implementation that is solely focused on protecting the lives of the earth and all people, primary among nation states, then all people, whether it's developing countries or developed countries, would share a purpose and direction regardless of their beliefs, because it becomes about resonance. In the same when there's a world war, in the same when there's an environmental crisis, which is happening right now. So it's a resonance that we need to take action. So when this does happen, and it's already happening, but it's still negated by a global ignorant structure. But when we have a situation where, through an international organisation, social entrepreneurs can work with NGOs and charities that have humanitarian focus, then it will create an organic economy. So we need this international organisation that are based on the collective needs of humanity as a whole, which also harmonises with the earth. And this can only happen, in my view, through unity, is collectively recognising that this is the only way. And a good example of this was the International Red Cross that developed in the same way in response to the suffering during the times of war. The Red Cross developed virally in that action swelled up from the compassion of the people, which led to global action. And so it isn't as far-fetched as we all may think from how we see the world today. Because in my view, it can happen and will happen sooner or later when the conditions change and problems continue to escalate across the world and global awareness becomes clearer. So this is not some utopian dream. This is actually for our very survival as a species within the 21st century. And it would begin like a process where we have an international ethical authority which would begin to allow people working together above and beyond the economic interests. And this process would replicate the workings of nature, in that the parts begin to pattern together in greater complexity, organization and self-regulation, and eventually create a symbiotic and harmonized whole. In the same way, when you look at birds flying in the sky together, naturally in harmony with the earth, which is a scientific fact. So people are the same as the environment. The outer affects the inner, and the inner affects the outer. Life is a totally cyclic process. The outer and inner cannot be separated, which is being proven by quantum physics. So they are constantly affecting each other. And the universe is a whole process that does not depend on human-made politics and economics. It doesn't function like a game show like we see today. It is an intelligent process of growth and renewal, and beyond the authority of the show. So we all need to take a step back from the environmental crisis situation and look at the problem objectively. The conclusion is clear that on climate change, the concept of emission reduction under the current paradigm is a myth, since every car, plane, factory are constantly adding and accumulating to the already high and lethal concentration of greenhouse gases. So the crisis can only be tackled by phasing out the greenhouse gases altogether, in many ways like the Montreal Protocol did, rather than just tinkering with the symptoms such as legal behavioural changes and taxation. So let's look at the reality. The recent report shows that now China is expected to pass the EU on emissions, and the magnitude of the climate crisis is now totally beyond the current system's ability to solve it. And we know this through what is happening and the UN reports. So there is much talk about the urgency of action, and we need to make the change now. And we're trying to use international laws, but they affirm sovereign rights of states to manage their own natural resources within a geographical area, which, from my observation, is totally ineffective, because deforestation and greenhouse gases released in one area, in one state, will without doubt affect other states or areas of the global commons. And therefore, this fundamental issue needs to be addressed. So the climate change regime, the international climate change regime, becomes like a ad hoc legal and technocratic jargon. And there was a famous quote, and the quote was, "We can create more and more laws, environmental laws, but that can actually distract us from the fact that nature is dying." So in many ways it could be a way to not face the reality. So the map is not the territory. And so while we have state sovereignty and transnational corporations sideline any threat to the fossil fuel industry, at the same time the global players have become wrapped up in a complex regime like a statistical emissions game that has no effect on real outcomes. So the output of greenhouse gases continues to increase, and this statistical game is going along side by side on this marvellous earth. So it is the utmost importance that we unite through unity. The principles of customary international law relating to countries' sovereign territorial rights with the need to protect the global environment. And that is something that can happen through an international humanitarian government. And so this is a holistic approach that would lead the world based on intelligence and wisdom, social development, global cooperation, and therefore naturally renewable energy, careful conservation, recycling, biodegradable production, leading to high levels of efficiency. And this would cultivate new opportunities for innovation, creativity, exploration, enjoyment, and exploring the unknown. So often, what appears does seem unrealistic, but things can change very quickly. Just look at what's happening today compared to even 5 years ago. And when we can actually see that and clear the mind, we can see that a cooperative framework would dramatically improve humanity as a whole and the earth. So it's time to work together. We need earth-centric wisdom, moving beyond ideological positions, policy proposals, and maintain the status quo. We need a response to an unfolding global crisis like an emergency, like a UN relief operation to the environmental issues. That is no longer arguing and fighting against ideas. It's about action, where we work together, brother to brother, sister to sister, and sister to brother, where practical solutions outside of any ideological paradigm, by using the greater sense of awareness and holistic thinking that has been told by wise and intelligent people throughout history. And working as a policy advisor for the Department for Energy and Climate Change has allowed me to see with my own eyes that the national system is locked in a very slow, linear, rational process that is controlled then by global economics. So it is now time, in my view, to move to an age of wisdom. We have had the age of enlightenment, we've had the industrial age, we've had the information age and the digital age, and now I think we collectively agree that there's now an emergence of wisdom. So now is the time for the age of wisdom. The age of wisdom is based on humanity, it's based on the heart, using the intellect, which is an international humanitarian cooperation. But time is running out. As Dr. Rangendra from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC said, the high-speed mitigation train needs to leave the station very soon, and all of global society needs to get on board. But the system is not doing that. So the only real authority in the world is standing where we are standing right now. It is the earth. And this is not some new age view, ideology. It's just a straightforward, common sense fact. Obviously, it's the case. That has been veiled by an outdated idea and authority that I think we collectively watch on TV and agree to be now superficial. So I would say that the reason you guys are here today is that you see the need to start thinking with this wisdom and globally, and I'm sure you have been doing for a long time, and getting more frustrated with the system as it is. So this new model that connects the working of scientific practicality and ethical wisdom will move humanity beyond the fixed and outdated ideology that divides. And I think we are all beginning to resonate and feel this. We're all beginning to connect globally. And this is where the urgent action can come about, so we can truly all benefit together. And this new vision will lead to active participation, which is what's happening today, that is governed by self-organized compassion, ethics beyond the outdated ideologies. So it is time to just simply work together for the common good of the whole. And it can be done. As the famous sentence states, just do it. A global movement must come from a direct and clear action. And I get a sense it's now starting to emerge because we are collectively seeing the global economic power cannot solve the problem. And if we look beyond the global economic problem, look at nation states. And the reason they are like that is because of global economic power. They are comparative advantage, which is what they call in business, obviously, that we all know, is that this creates a competition between each one of them, what Grant was talking about earlier. But it ignores the sensible and logical truth that all the parts, this is just the truth, all the parts are one organic process of the earth. And so real solutions cannot come from that perspective, can only come from holistic comprehension. As Professor Ottmer stated from the IPCC as well, there needs to be a massive shift away from fossil fuels, and investment needs to shift to going 100% to clean and fast as possible. 100%, not just 20%, 30% UN, we need by 2050, 60. It needs to be 100% urgently. So the current system is observable as an outdated, ignorant system. So when we recognise this now, we recognise that the local and global process can act through unity, because now the local is part of the earth and part of global communication. So the local can interconnect and become global. And this will develop collective true leadership that uses standards that are selflessly balancing the resources of the whole world in the most sensible and systematic way. So it is understandable that these solutions may seem radical from our current perspective. I understand that. But if one could imagine how the proposal of the United Nations would have been viewed before and during the Second World War, then it is easier to see the possibility of these changes. So after the Second World War, Europe was forced to work together and rebuild a modern European Union. This interdependence ended the possibility of war between these democratic nations. In the same way, the current global problem is creating greater interdependence between humanity. So we need to work together. So the function of these institutions now, we know, are failing, but an international humanitarian organisation could be thrashed out and worked together by groups organising together committees and communities across the world through international communication, coordination and cooperation. So, very quickly, as mentioned, it is clear that intelligent solutions in ecology, economics, engineering, science, manufacturing, etc. already exist. So we can continue to discuss these ideas forever, but we cannot put them into practice at a level that will have effective, significant change, because we are playing a mental game. The nation-states are playing a mental competitive game. So how do we get this so-called power to make the necessary changes in a holistic and collective manner in order to avert disaster? How can we get this power? Only through unity. Speaking with one voice, with those who have pulled away the need to prove, the need to be right, who truly care about the welfare of the whole, and who work with heart and mind. You can see that here, certainly. It is these that are going to change the world. However, at present time, we are fragmented into groups pursuing agendas. So, in my view, it's time for the human spirit. It is time for this to be unleashed if we are to solve our collective problems. So the urgency is immediate, and this is the heart of a truly an ethical humanitarian movement. So it is time to urgently bring this momentum about, which does have a truly ethical dimension. This is what is to be done. Thank you very much. Thank you.